The event today is called Conversations with High Performers. We've chosen Tony as our guest in this series because, well, first of all, he happens to be a local here in Barcelona, although originally from the UK. He is an expert in negotiating. And the most important thing for me in terms of his negotiation skills and insights and the things that he brings to the table, he focuses on emotionally intelligent negotiation, which for me really aligns with People Playbook and our values.
My name is Tony Anagor. I'm a leadership coach. I also am an entrepreneur. I'm an author, and I'm the author of a program on negotiation. One of my passions is to almost like debunk and democratize the idea of negotiation, because a lot of people, when they hear negotiation, they think it should be something like a bit of a battle. Most people don't like negotiating. Through my experience, I've learned that negotiation is actually key to opening up some really incredible outcomes. One of the things that I love about emotionally intelligent negotiation is it forces you to connect with how you're feeling in real time at that moment. And what I'm noticing is a lot of the emotions that I might feel towards specific negotiators or negotiations are, for me, data points of information. When I take the time to unpack why I'm feeling that specific way, it has a direct result on the actual outcome of the negotiation. If I focus on me and what I'm going to say, I'm excessively nervous. But if I focus on the people and how I can help them with the knowledge that I've picked up over the last 20, 30 years, then I'm excited to share it with them.
Tony, I love this EIN, the emotionally intelligent negotiation piece. We're going to get into what it is, etc. But you work with a lot of leaders. We know kind of inherently that it's an important skill, negotiation. What's your view on the skill of negotiation within the context of being a high performer?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me here. For me, this is like a real sweet spot. I love working with leaders. I think as leaders, it's really important that you take time to invest in this kind of stuff, in your own personal development, in your skills, in the way in which you communicate. I think it's so important. And my trajectory was, for 20 years, I've been teaching communication skills. And a vertical of that is what happens when we negotiate with each other. Why is it when we negotiate that there seems to be this battle, right? Why is it that people don't like negotiating? 80% of people actually don't like negotiating. And the other day I looked up the word negotiate. If you look it up, the word negotiating, it comes from the Latin word negotium. Neg means not, otium means pleasure. In Spanish, negocio, not fun. So it's no accident that people can't stand negotiating. They don't like negotiating because it's actually not fun. So the whole idea of almost like democratizing the idea of negotiation and rebranding it, it's not a battle. It's not something where I win, you lose. It is something that it's a creative pursuit that people can get involved in order to create better outcomes.
I love that. It reminds me, Tony, the way you talk about negotiation is really interesting. Oftentimes in the work that we both do in this field, networking gets a collective sigh. Ooh, networking, and it needs a rebrand of like, it's just meeting people, it's connecting with one another. I can't believe you had the definition ready to go of not fun. Please stay with us. I think learning about it is important, but it is important because it's something we're often doing, right? And especially leaders, especially high performers, you find yourself like, it's not just once a year, it's just an ongoing thing that takes place. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's a really good point. We're negotiating all the time, every day. Studies show that the average person actually negotiates between 8 and 12 times a day.
Wow.
And most of us don't even realize. And so the idea of emotionally intelligent negotiating is to understand in real time what's really going on here. And essentially speaking, when two or more people come together to discuss something that they both care about, then you're in a negotiation. And it could be a merger or an acquisition. It could be your salary. It could be you negotiating with your partner about where you're going to eat dinner this evening. The whole interaction is a negotiation where you are creating that environment for what it is that you really care about, what I care about, so we can actually put them and have a creative conversation about how we can create something that's good for both of us.
Yeah. I love that you bring creativity onto that. I'd like to hear a bit more about your point of view on the creative element within negotiation before we jump into your first point.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about this creativity aspect.
Yeah. There's a myth that the best negotiators are these fast thinkers, fast talkers, walk around in slick suits and big fat Rolexes, and that's all nonsense. I mean, it's been hyped by movies, it's been hyped by the press, but actually, real negotiation, to be really successful at negotiating, I think Flick said it earlier on, it's about really asking good questions. The better you are at asking questions, the better you are at creating these almost like you create wonderful situations out of nothing, right? Two people come together, they get in the room, and they create a scenario that wasn't there before. And that's because they've developed this ability to ask these really good, incisive questions. Remember, and sometimes the answers are innocuous. Sometimes you might pick up an answer here, and it might, in that moment, seem like nothing to do with the conversation. But as you start to expand the conversation, you realize that when you look at the bigger picture, you can create something that's pretty special.
Just as you were describing that, Tony, I hadn't thought about this until you were sharing this wonderfully articulated definition of creativity within the context of negotiation, something that wasn't there before. I couldn't help but think about Michael Jordan. I don't know if anyone has seen the film at all with, it's just about the shoes, not about Michael Jordan, about the deal that they negotiated, that he would take a cut of every Jordan branded Nike basketball shoe. And that had never been done before.
Yeah.
And I just love that concept of creativity in the conversation, asking questions. And the other thing, Tony, that I think many of us think about when we hear negotiation, we think it's about I win, you lose. What does that mean for you in the context of negotiating? Because that's quite unique, right? That you've rebranded it almost and said, actually, to be effective at this, I'm going to bring in the emotional intelligence.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I've done like the Harvard negotiation, Berkeley University. I've read so many books. As you know, I have a podcast. So I talk to negotiators all over the world. And if you had looked in the 80s and 90s, negotiation was about leave your emotions to one side and focus on the fact. The problem is, even if the facts look right, I'm sure you've all been in those situations where on paper it looks like a great deal, but you just didn't like the other person. For some reason, you didn't trust the other person. Like and trust are emotions. So how can you have a negotiation and leave emotions to one side where if the problem is the emotions, the challenge is the emotions? So emotionally intelligent negotiation is about bringing these emotions to center stage and using these emotions as data points for information to understand what you care about. And people also think emotions are people screaming and crying and banging their hands on the table. If I show up at a negotiation and I've just had an argument with my business partner and I show up, that emotion that I'm feeling, it's called an emotional overhang. So it's got nothing to do with you, but I'm annoyed because I had an argument with my business partner. But that will affect the outcome of this negotiation. And so when we talk about emotional intelligence, we really want to be able to understand in real time what my emotions are, what effect they're having on me and on my counterpart. And also, what about the other person? How are they feeling, right? What's going on with them? And let's have an open conversation around how you're feeling specifically about the outcome and about the process of the negotiation.
Just love the context of emotion in this because oftentimes we do think it's on paper. So I think this is a great deal, but yeah, you're ticked off because you're coming from a bad meeting or you're not in great, you didn't sleep well last night, whatever it is, right? And even on paper, the numbers, but actually the emotion that we're all bringing to these conversations. And this is, again, now the jumping off part, because I love this. When we think of negotiation, oftentimes, I think early in my career, I saw it as a win-lose. If we're negotiating, I want something that you don't want to give, and you're in the way of that. But actually, your first kind of principle that you have shared with us through the emotionally intelligent negotiation principles, through your cards and all the great stuff you've been doing in your book, your counterpart is not the enemy. Tell us a bit more about that.
So over the years, We just observed negotiations. We studied them, we watched them on YouTube, we watched them live. We spoke to people who were negotiating across the board. And what we did is we looked at either cognitive biases or certain behaviors that seem to be prevalent throughout all these negotiations. And then we came up with 7 principles. And they're principles, they're not rules, they're not laws, they're just principles, because we wanted people to be able to imbibe these. The important thing about this style of negotiation is I want you to be able to, on Monday morning, to apply what you've learned. I don't want you to have to go and do more research and study it to make sure it makes logical sense. So we came up with these principles. And the first principle was your counterpart is not your enemy. Why? Because we observed that people showed up at negotiations with this idea of this other person is somebody who I have to win, I have to beat. And that style of negotiation, it does exist. If you're a corporate raider, for example, and your job is to go in and buy a company and chop it into pieces and sell it off, you don't really care about the other part, your counterparty. But those kind of negotiations are fewer and far between. The everyday negotiation isn't like that. And so we teach people to think, have the mindset that your counterpart is not your enemy. And imagine if you start a negotiation from that standpoint. It's a completely different set of options that you have open to you when you think, you're not my enemy. It doesn't mean that you're my friend. So let's not mix it up. Emotion intelligent negotiation doesn't mean that you're going to be soft and you're going to be supplicative and let everyone walk all over you. It's the complete opposite. So you're not my friend, but you're not my enemy. And that mindset, Flick was talking about the reframing. That reframe of how you see your counterpart completely changes the options that you have available to you, and therefore has a direct effect on the outcome of the negotiation.
Your second point, Tony. So the first is around your counterpart is not the enemy. Talked about practicing mindfulness, seeing them as people. I think that's really a great starting point. No wonder it's number 1 in your set of principles, of which there are 7. We're going to cover 3 today. Your second one is seek to understand, not convince. I love this. I'm really curious to hear more about that.
This is based on 2 observable behaviors, cognitive biases. The first bias is called naive realism. Naive realism is when, Tony, you and I, we might read an article, the words are exactly the same, and then you come up with a different conclusion to me. And I think, well, Tony, you and I have read the same article. How can you possibly see things different to me? And I label you as something else. And that's called naive realism, when you both look at the same information and you label the other person something else because they don't see things the same way you see them. And the second cognitive bias is the boomerang effect. The boomerang effect states that when I push for something, the harder I push, the more you resist. Which means that even if I've got a great deal for you, we've all seen it, this is the best deal for you, you can do this. And what do? You push back. Even if on paper it's great, you start to think there's something about this person that I really don't trust. And so we seek to understand, not to convince, because when you try and convince somebody, the natural tendency is to push back and to disbelieve. And that's a real challenge in a negotiation, because if you come in and you're trying to convince me to buy a product or try and convince me one way or another, my natural cognitive biases will kick in. And if you're aware of that, then you have to think, okay, right, how do I seek to understand? Again, where's Tony coming from? And ask genuine, curious questions to figure out my landscape. And in doing so, then you'll find that leads on to the next principle, but I'll wait for you to ask that.
So I think this is absolutely critical. And the getting curious has already been a theme in this Conversations with High Performers series. It's something that honestly rings true regardless of the expert I'm speaking to, the curiosity. I'm curious about, curious, practically, how do we go about, like, how much time should people spend on this phase, right? Rather than jump in blindly and make assumptions. You know, what do you do or tell leaders to do or high performers to do in order to really, understand first?
Yeah. I have a client, he's a real estate broker in Oklahoma. I think Frick knows him, actually. And he started with me about 3 years ago, and he really has no interest in other people. His thing was, I just need to make money. And during the course of our training, he said to me, Tony, I know I should ask questions about my clients. I know I should ask, but how do you ask such good questions? And I said to him, well, you really have to care about them, right? You have to care, and you have to be curious. And if you care about them, yeah, but I just want, yeah, I just want to get the deal. And how's that working out for you? Okay, so let's try this. Let's try caring about them because they've got worries and concerns just like you. They've shown up for a reason, and being curious. He's now one of the top negotiators in his region in Oklahoma. And if he was here today, he would say it's all come down to asking good questions, but genuinely caring about the other people, genuinely caring about his clients. And then what happens when you genuinely care about your clients, you go the extra mile without even knowing it because you care.
Yeah. I spend a lot of time in this space working with leaders with their teams. Similar dynamic in terms of relationship. And oftentimes what I tell them is, yes, ideally you want to care about them as human beings. And sometimes if I have pushback, I say, well, I don't really care about them. They're not my friend.
Yeah.
As you said earlier, I try to help them reframe it and understand that by caring about them and their goals, what they're trying to achieve is this kind of mutual
Yeah.
win-win. Is that something you subscribe to?
Yeah, and I get some pushback as well from some people because, in fact, this morning I was talking to someone, and he's in the healthcare, and he said, "All this namby-pamby caring stuff doesn't work, does it?" And I said to him, "Well, what happens is for example, when you look at a deal, whether you're going to go for a deal on, let's say you have 4 deals on the table, and 4 people presenting the deal." When it's been presented, typically what will happen is you'll say, which one did I like best? You won't say which one was the best on paper. Which one did I like best? And it's the person who presented. And then typically what happens is you might go to the person you liked best and say, look, we've got this, and try and make that deal work just because you like that person. And so I think it's really important to really focus on and understand the role that those soft namby-pamby emotions actually do play on our everyday interactions.
And that for me, what you described there, and you said about, I think the other person in Oklahoma, you said, show me the results. Oftentimes when I'm in this space of leadership and leadership development, team development, and we get pushback, I always say, well, let's try it.
Yeah.
Let's experiment. And you've shared a great success story where this person would say, this is the reason that I have achieved what I have achieved. And I suspect for many folks here, they do care about their role, about their clients, whether internal or external, and that's helped them get there.
Yeah.
So I love that
Yeah.
you've doubled down on, well, let's get the result.
Yeah.
What's going to get
I'll
it
tell you
done?
another story to really illustrate this point. So I was working with someone who had a team, and during COVID, that team suddenly they weren't selling any products anymore because everything shut down. And this particular person came to me and said, I need to connect with my team. And I said, okay, well, what are you doing at the moment? And this person's very pragmatic, very boom, 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 doesn't like, talking about emotions or anything like this. But for the first time, they're on Zoom and they've got their leadership team there. They've got 13 of them and they've got nothing to talk about. And I remember saying to this person, can you name a member of your team? And they gave me a name. And I said, when is their birthday? I don't know. Where did they go on holiday last year? Don't know. How many children do they have? Do they have children? Don't know. And they turned to me and said, I should know this. These are my team, right? And so the next conversations, instead of talking about work, they talked about themselves. And then all of the other stuff started to come out. And that team is still together today. And they're one of the most successful teams in the area. And this person got a huge promotion. And every time they're not based in Barcelona, but every time they come to Barcelona, he always gives me a call. We go out and we talk about these stories. So this is somebody who was very pragmatic, didn't believe in that stuff, but then realized that actually at the seat of all of what drives us are those type of emotions.
It's countercultural in some ways, isn't it? Well, it depends on which culture you're in,
Yeah.
in terms of let's get to business.
Yeah.
Here's what I want. Here's what I need. And I think, I totally buy into this way of thinking.
Yeah.
I often tell leaders and folks I work with, it's like more important to be interested than it is to be interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting comes later,
Yeah.
but be interested, and that will lay the path
Yeah.
for a great relationship.
Yeah.
Tony, we're making headway. You were gonna jump into point three, and thank you for holding off. But this is perhaps my favorite one, and I'm really excited to hear you describe it in the way that you do so well. Create value before capturing value.
Yeah. This is probably the toughest one to actually do. It sounds easy, rolls off the tongue easily, but it's so difficult to do in practice. Create value before capturing value. Our natural temptation is to want to go in and say what I want. This is what I want. That's our natural temptation. But if we are curious about the way in which we have the conversation, we can create value around what is important to them and what's important to you. And so we advocate taking time and spending time in the negotiation. I've got to find out what's important to you, Tony. And I've really got to and once I've found out what's important to you, then I've got to find out, I've got to almost in my mind prioritize what are the top things for you that you need. And even when you tell me, I need to then ask, okay, so supposing this deal gets done, what happens next? What are the next steps? What are you going to do? Who benefits other than yourself when this deal gets done? And that's me. I'm searching for more information, creating value, because now you're going to say, after this, I'm going to share this with my stakeholders, with my investors, with my team. Okay, so you've just now created value from thin air. You've just let the other person know that, okay, you're going to go back to your team and you're going to share a story. So you're going to go up in their estimation, and that's value. And now the important thing is to capture value. And collaborative kind of soft negotiators fall down on that part. They're very good at creating value, but when it goes into actually capturing the value, when you need to be tough, and this is why I always say with emotionally intelligent negotiation, it's about being assertive, not aggressive. It's about capturing what's important to you as well. Otherwise, they'll roll over you, walk away, and they'll think they've got a great deal, and you'll suffer from buyer's remorse because you didn't get what you wanted. So that third principle is really important, that you stand your ground and you're assertive about, okay, right, Tony, these are some of the things that I've understood that you really need in this deal. Am I right in that? Is there anything I've missed out? Would you like to go over this so we can look at this again? Yeah. Would you be interested in hearing the things that I would also like so we could make this deal even better? Yeah. Okay, great. I've earned the right to ask that question. So now you're going to listen to what I believe is important, and then we have a conversation.
That question blew my mind. So I'm glad we record this because I want to write it down and practice it. So would you be interested in hearing what I would like from this? Is that the question?
Yeah. Yeah.
I just, because I was thinking about, you're right that oftentimes, at least in my field, and I suspect for the high performers here and those listening and joining at home, being a great performer often means you're going above and beyond in giving value.
Yeah.
You're giving value. And then it comes to those hard conversations about, okay, well, what's next and what do I want back in return? And even there, I was listening to you, Tony, I was thinking, I struggle to, then draw the line, be boundaried, and ask for what is, I feel deserved because of what I have put in terms of value. And so that question you shared, I think is a really good jumping off point. Any others, or is that the go-to for you in terms of, I've had the conversation, I've fully understood how I'm giving you value, you said, out of thin air through great questions and going above and beyond, really seeking to understand, how else can we have those difficult conversations about, this is what I'd like in return?
If you've done it right, typically you'll find you don't need to ask that question. They'll ask the question to you, because there's the this sense of, well, Tony's given so much, right? What's in it for you, Tony? What is it that you want? So typically they'll ask. If they don't ask, then that's when you need to put your foot down and say, well, look, we've talked a lot about the things that you want and the things that are going to make the deal sweet for you. What do you think the next best step would be? Just keep quiet. Silence, by the way, is another really important approach in a negotiation. It's so underestimated how we can use silence in a negotiation. They always say, if you're going for a deal, make your offer and just keep quiet. Don't negotiate with yourself, and you negotiate yourself down on your. I've seen it so many times.
If you'd watched me, you'd have seen me do it many times, especially early on, for sure.
It's so easy to do.
Yeah.
And if the other person is smart, they'll know you'll make an offer and they'll just keep quiet, or maybe a shake of the head, maybe a slight disappointing look. And then you will actually negotiate with yourself and bring yourself down on the price and lose your anchor.
I'm laughing because it reminds me of one of the first deals that we did for People Playbook. It was a pretty significant deal. And I remember I was working with David on our team, and we'd put forward a proposal, and I thought it was fair. I know it was fair. In fact, if anything, I knew they were going to get more value than we were going to get. And I sent it out, and the client came back and said, proposal looks great. Love the design. Think this is going to really work. We're just not sure about budget. And my tendency back then was to go, well, we'll knock 20% off and we'll just make it work. And I could feel myself jumping in, but David pulled me back and said, have they negotiated yet?
Yeah.
Have they said what they want to change? Then let's just pause. And also the second learning from that experience was when it did get to negotiation, you can't give the same value to them for less. You can't say, well, I'll just take 20% off. Well, it's not the same thing.
Yeah. You said the really key word there, which is value. Value is such a subjective word because what you value and I value are two totally different things. So you said it was a fair deal. They got much more so it wasn't a fair deal, right? For you, it wasn't a fair deal. For them, it was a fair deal. So this idea of value, I think it's important to be curious about what is it that you actually value and to ask the question. There's nothing wrong with asking the question to whoever it is, what is it that you value? And typically what I would ask is, you might say something and I would say, just so that I understand, why is this important to you? And it's genuine. You're not trying to catch them out. Why is this important to you? Or you can just maybe suggest, I get the sense this is really important to you. Yes, it's important because blah, blah, blah. And then all the information comes out as to why that deal's so important.
I love that. How important is it? I love a scale question. How important is it to you, Tony, that we do this then, 1 to 10? I think that really helps.
By the way, just a very quick point. Most negotiations fail for 3 main reasons: lack of preparation, lack of trust, and a big ego. They're the 3 main reasons that negotiations fail. So my advice to you is always, always prepare. And prepare means preparing what you want, but also preparing a hypothesis for what they want. My experience, people go into negotiation and you make me an offer and they always want more than that's on the table, but they don't really know what. They just feel, right, that's your first offer, so therefore there must be another offer behind it. So if you prepare effectively and you know exactly what you want and they make you that offer, then you know how close that is to what it is that you're actually looking for.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That anchoring piece, the way you described it is wonderful. And it comes back to the curiosity piece, the care, what you want, and just spending time in that. Tony, we're getting towards the end. I want to ask you the question we ask all our guests on 3 Points podcast, which is, if we're all going to adapt a more emotionally intelligent form of negotiation, how might the world change?
I'm going to use the words of a guy called Kwame Christian, and he runs the #1 podcast for negotiation in the world. And whether you are a sales team, whether finance, marketing, and you just don't get along, whether it's parents and children, whether it's nations, what Kwame says is the best outcomes lie on the other end of a difficult conversation. And so my crusade is I want to democratize negotiation. I want people to be able to walk into these conflictive situations knowing that they've got the skill set and the ability and the emotional intelligence to hear things that they might not like, but still respond in a measured way. Because on the other end of those type of conversations, for me, that's where the pot of gold is. That's where the magic is. If we could just stay through those difficult conversations.
I love that. Let's all get there. And if you haven't already, do check out Tony's podcast. And please do follow him. There's so much gold. I listened to that with Kwame, and I took so much from it. And I love how you host. But I've been so delighted to have you as a guest. Let's give a round of applause for Tony Anagor, please.